another Zoom because it's endless Zooms every day,
Yes,
all
we
day.
do too. Yes.
So thank you all. I hope everybody's doing well. Most of this meeting will turn over to Lauren and Cindy Amara to talk about what our next steps are going to be once, I'm going to be very positive about this, once town meeting approves the transfer of 808 Jerusalem Road and additional monies into our account. And then I think our next step, as we discussed at our last meeting, is going to be to issue an RFP. So Cindy, I don't know if Lauren and or Jen has kind of updated you on a lot of our questions, but it was kind of like, what do we do when, and where does Affordable Housing Steering Committee and their work with, you know, a potential RFP respondent go, and you know, where do we draw the lines and click into what kind of a process once we have possession of the property? So.
You're not going to like the answers I give you because they're not black and white. There truly is, you can be the driving force or you can be more of funding. It's really how active the Affordable Housing Trust wants to be. You're going to put out an RFP, so I'm assuming you're going to prefer to be the funding source on the project and have like a GC. Solicit proposals for what people will do with the property based on the guidelines of what you want to see. Is that how you envision what you want to do?
Yes, unless somebody has a different or more nuanced answer. That's my understanding.
No, that's functionally correct. Yeah, there is relatively limited expertise on the amongst the trustees for you know, the hands-on development that exists with Tom. The rest of us are, you know, we don't have that skill, and we've envisioned that we've envisioned that the law seems to say that the trustees' role here is a fiduciary one. So overseeing the structure and the objectives of the RFP would be critical, but getting into the nuts and bolts of it, not so much.
I think, you know, Cindy, I think maybe part of the question is how to best structure the RFP. I think in our mind, I think what you're hearing is, I don't know that we want or need an ongoing financial or partnership interest in the property. So I think what we're out there doing is issuing an RFP to contribute the property in, you know, to
Correct.
a new partnership to be run, owned, managed, everything by a non-profit development. I don't think the town, I'm totally sort of, you know, condensing down what I've understood to be the case. I don't think, like, once there's, let's say it's a duplex, let's say that what it gets built there is 2 affordable units. I don't think that the AHT can, you know, is thinking about maintaining a long-term ownership in that property. Is that, like, even in an LP type position? Is that correct?
That's my understanding as well on this particular project, for sure.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
So it's very specific to this project. I think the idea is to convey the property to more than likely a nonprofit developer.
Then those are the types of things that will be a part of your RFP. I mean, because literally you can have any range of involvement. And from what I'm hearing you're saying, you want to contribute the funds and the money and turn it over to someone else to run with it and accomplish it and get it up and running.
And here again, specific to this deal, it's actually not money. It's not cash money. It's the property. It's the fee ownership. And
well, that's sort of the money end of it. You're contributing a resource to it, but you're not going to be involved in the development of it.
Correct.
Or the
That's right.
ownership of it. So instead of money towards the project, you're giving the property. But that kind of level of involvement is what you're looking to do.
correct.
And I mean, in terms of the RFP, it truly needs to be based on your specific goals. So what I've heard you say right now is you're looking for a nonprofit. You're looking for someone to ultimately come in and own the property. You're looking for someone to come in and develop it, and you're looking for a duplex type of situation. What I would suggest is you take that list of ideas and you expand it as much as you can, and you work with, do you have a town engineer?
Yes.
Yes.
Work with your engineer to sort of get the nuts and bolts of the technical requirements you're looking for to put out in the RFP. And then I could work with you in terms of putting the proposal in a proper form that meets, all the RFP requirements, and that also make sure the language you're using is protective to the community and also is gives you control if you don't like any of the proposals you receive. So it's really a drafting and decision-making process. It's not a here's step A, here's step B. You seem to be sort of between A and B. You've got a plan, you've got a property, you have an idea where you want to go, but now you need the technical expertise to sort of rough out what to make sure you include from a development end in the RFP. And I can help you with, well, from my experience, you got to make sure you've got all the bases covered. You've got to make sure you've got a nonprofit that has done this kind of work before, that you're happy with their reputation, that you get references, a time frame for building the proposal. So it's kind of hard to answer what you're looking for in specifics, other than to start with the engineer and what you want, and then we pull out RFP proposals and start plugging numbers and figures in and get it out there. I mean, start with a goal of when you want to get the RFP out, when you want to see this property done, given where you are in time and space and where we are in time and space, what's the likelihood of construction timing? And I don't have a sense of what your local nonprofit pools are. If I recall correctly, there was a particular entity you wanted to work with. Was it Habitat for Humanity, I believe?
Yes. They've been working with the Affordable Housing Steering Committee and actually made some presentations about probably 2 years ago now for this particular property to the Board of Selectmen. So, I mean, again, without prejudicing any future, RFPs and responses, that is somebody that's already shown some interest in it. So one of the questions I had was, and this is to the committee members, I mean, is there a reason to limit it to a nonprofit, or is it typically limiting gets you better results in the long run?
I'm not sure I understand your question, because I mean, it's an affordable housing trust. It's supposed to go to development of affordable housing.
Correct.
I don't think you can have a for-profit
Okay.
doing this. That doesn't mean you can't have for-profit contractors involved, but the goal is not for someone to be making a profit off of affordable housing in this situation. But what you can do is, if you have this proposal that at least is in front of the town and has some support and at least some familiarity to it, use that as a basis for the RFP, taking the things you like about it and putting it out there, but opening it up a little to see who else may respond. I mean, the way to think of it is, here's something we like. We can craft it so that if we really, really think this is the best person, they're likely to be the ones that will have the best response. But if you're still kind of looking a little bit to make sure you really have the best fit for your community in this particular project, you craft it with a little more room and flexibility, and you see who replies. I mean, you use it as a system of, at a minimum you like this and you have an interested party, but you don't know the universe of what else is out there. And by getting that universe, you're doing your due diligence to make sure you're doing the best with the funds and resources you have, and then it expands. I mean, you may get a response that has some element to the development of the project that you may not have ever contemplated. So you can kind of use the RFP as a kind of an exciting way. You're guiding what you want and what you're looking for, but you may be pleasantly surprised by what else is out there.
Yeah, I just want to say
that's
that.
sort of, yeah, that's where I was going. Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, I just want to say, I really don't think we should make it for the nonprofit kind of company. We should open it up to everybody, especially on our initial project like this. And I agree with Cindy saying that who knows what's going to come up. And I'm not sure how you handle it when you work with a contractor for profit. So he gets, if you work for a contractor, you don't want to make profit, but he does get his cost back. And so that's going to be part of it. But I just think you need to open up to everybody in this first go around, because who knows what's going to happen. And right now with the things opening up business-wise with contractors, I am a little familiar with that, having worked a lot of contractors. Some of these guys have maintained some business, others haven't, others have a lot of things on the books, others don't. So it's not going to be like business as usual, you know, that everybody's busy like they had been, you know, 3 months ago. So you never know what kind of a person may want some good publicity or something that's going to benefit them, you know, for future projects.
That is true, because, you know, the sale of the project or the rental of it, whichever way it's going to end up going, is going to have to be limited, you know, in terms of the profit that can be made off of it. So you don't know who, and in particular in this time, I agree. But you have to make sure you have very specific affordable housing limits in the RFP and what the goal is for the end result. Now, if somebody who has all sorts of money and runs a for-profit business and doesn't care that he's not going to make a big profit on this, that's fine.
Sure.
Cindy, should we enter into this already with an understanding of what we want the outcome to be for the dwelling itself? In other words, should we enter into the RFP with the predetermination that these units are going to be for ownership or rental?
I truly think that's a decision for you to make.
Okay.
I think you're likely to get a different pool for a rental project than you would from an ownership project. You also get different results in the end for the town. If it's rental, everything counts towards affordable. But these might all be affordable units that would count anyway. It's really what you want. You want rental, or if you want ownership. Okay.
Well, it's an item that I think that the trustees need to tackle up front on this particular parcel.
Right.
I think where this is, if I'm right, this is a rather small development that I mean, and it is up to the board, but I think, to me, given the size of the project, and this might be my own bias because I see a shortage in this area generally, is the ownership route. I personally don't see very many ownership options out there in the affordable world as many as do rentals, and largely it's because of economics. So on a small project, I don't know that it's really a decision for you to make, but I don't know, given the size of this project, that the ultimate construction would be that different.
Right.
No, but our engagement might be different, right? You know,
yeah, I mean, and the terms, if someone's coming in to buy it and develop it and do it according to your RFP, someone may have a very different view of their interest in the project if it's something they're going to be, you know, if it's going to be an ownership or a rental.
Yeah, where I was going with it is really for, you know, the board consideration. There's a variety of ways to look at this with respect to its location and the impact on that neighborhood and the like. You know, if it's deed restricted for ownership, you know, forever onward, then, you know, does that bring a level of final feeding and care to the real estate that we'd like to have on that corner, right? Remember what was there. It was a pretty tumble down building over the years. Likewise, if it's for rental, then you know, typically at that point, I mean, I'm thinking of it in most simplistic terms. There's a landlord. Who's the landlord? Right? If the end use of the property is either for ownership or rent, and we decide to go with a rental, then does that maintain the trust's involvement in overseeing the property? And
No.
do we want it? Well, no, I mean, you say that, but then again, you know, if you just relinquish it and that property becomes a blight, then I'm not sure that we've really done our job.
You could make the same argument though about you can't control ownership either, right? You might sell it to a good family in the beginning, and then who purchases it in, you know, next.
Tom, you're right. I'm putting it out there because I'm just asking the questions as they occur to me.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's a solution that's one better than the other.
So I think, you know, it might be helpful to like just take a step back and kind of define for people maybe like how these partnerships or these real properties can be developed, because we all use, you know, different terms maybe in different ways. So, and this plays into, like, for example, if it were a for rent partnership, like you have to think about, okay, so the word I would use is sponsor. So sponsor is equal to developer, is equal to general partner. And so the sponsor is the one who, and the sponsor, in my view, Cindy, correct me if I'm wrong, the sponsor actually could be for-profit or non-profit. There are for-profit affordable housing owners and developers. I think one of the reasons we might, this is a different discussion and we should put a marker on this and talk about this. One of the reasons we might lean towards nonprofit is because I think we're going to, in conjunction with just conveying the property outright, like we're going to give this property to somebody, kind of a tough sell if we give it to a for-profit, you know, entity. But the second thing beside that is there are going to need to be variances granted for whatever gets constructed there.
Right.
And so same thing, I think you have the best possible shot if it's a not-for-profit developer, if you're going to go in for, you know, density variances. So put that out there for now. But the point I was trying to make was this idea of roles. And so, like, you know, the old school, you know, affordable housing development partnerships are GPLP structures, right? General partner and limited partners. Like in some more active affordable housing trusts may want to be ongoing LPs in the deal. They would have an ongoing limited partner interest, non-managing, you know, just as a way to kind of state their claim on whatever goes on there in the future. I think we've kind of pretty clearly said we're not interested in that type of structure. So it's even more important to understand like who the GP is. And I think there are plenty of non-for-profit housing developers, GPs, who would step in to do this deal. But I think just, again, this idea of who the sponsor is would be the developer, and the developer may have their own construction company, or they may be hiring out for everything, right? Like a NeighborWorks, for example, is a sponsor. They're a not-for-profit, you know, affordable housing developer, but they wouldn't be the GC. They wouldn't be wearing a GC hat. They'd be hiring somebody who does GC work, you know, to Rob's point, you know, for a living and for profit. So just some kind of overall comments to think about.
Does anybody, and then I have a question for Lauren, so you can show yourself in a minute, but does anybody have any questions or anything that hasn't already spoken? Cindy, David, anybody, just in terms of general understanding of what some of our next steps might be? You good?
I don't have questions. I think your next steps are take a look at the proposal you have, take it to your board, discuss what you do and don't like, and like you've all said, where you want to go.
Cindy, good. So Lauren, I guess my next question is the process of starting to draft an RFP, because we don't do that. Or you know, is that something you would work with Cindy on, or what should be our next steps in terms of guiding staff to start crafting an RFP?
So I would suggest that it would be a collective effort between myself, maybe Jen and our procurement officer, as well as Cindy, we would work to get some, based on the conversations you've had and the parameters that you've outlined. And
Yeah.
then I would imagine it would be an iterative process. And as Cindy just said, you're going to want to have a discussion about what parameters you want to set. So we would work then with either, and that's again, I think it's a conversation that needs to be had. How involved do you want to be in the RFP process? Do you want to go through the nitty gritty? Do you want us to do that with the Affordable Housing Steering Committee instead? I would look to the committee as how you preferred that, but it would be, a process that would involve multiple staff members and some back and forth until we got a product that you were happy with.
So one of the questions I do have, which is kind of a technical question, is the variances and like literally what's allowed there, so that, is there something some research we should be doing with planning, for example, ahead of time before issuing an RFP? Because, we could say up to 3 or 4 units and it's like, will just never happen. I want to try to get all of that done ahead of time so that we know what could potentially work there in that site.
So, Jen, did you have something to say?
I think they would have to look at what kind of permit could be filed for. Generally, something where local zoning requirements need to be waived would be under a type of filing like a comprehensive permit. And then that's what 25 Ripley was, and that's what Avalon was. And that allows for the zoning board to hear an application and waive certain requirements like lot size, coverage, things like that. So we need to determine what kind of permit I would imagine that you would advise them they'd have to file for.
So Cindy Amara, my question is, like, I don't want to issue an RFP with parameters that, are going to require, 2 years of comprehensive permitting. I want to try to get all that understood ahead of time.
I apologize in that my Zoom froze and I missed most of what Jen was saying. So I apologize for that. But I do think the first thing you do is you take a look at the property and you look with your engineer and you get a sense of what can fit there and what your zoning and Concom and other requirements are. And then you work sort of backwards. What's the maximum density you want to see there? And how do you get there if that's what you want? I don't have any idea of what kind of wetlands constraints, geographic, topographic constraints there are to the property. I don't know for sure. Do you have wells and septic there? Or is it town water and sewer?
It's water and sewer.
Yeah, town water and sewer.
Life a lot easier in and of itself. You generally start with just what you would do on any project, which is taking a look at what the area is zoned for, what it is you ultimately want to put there, and what are your constraints. And that would be done with input from, the planning department, probably the wetlands department, your engineering department, DPW, all kind of getting a sense of bringing their input in. And then, once you get a sense of how big you want the project to be, then it's a question of, what kind of program advantages you want to take care of to get there. Because it's not going to be the basic same kind of zoning issues that come out in a for-profit. It's going to be, like Jen was saying, comprehensive permits.
Yeah. Tom, did you have something?
Yeah, I know we don't want to be that involved, but we could put somebody on a much better footing if we took the property through entitlements, and then it was just clear as day. If we have an approved plan based on a footprint, hey, you can build a duplex here. It's a tiny lot. I live up the street from it, and if you try to get anything more than 2 units on there, 2 units might be a non-starter for the neighborhood. I would put that out there for consideration. Would this be something that, as beneficial owners of the property, would we take it through entitlements? And so now you have a comprehensive special permit that you're issuing an RFP that says, hey, come build this duplex for us. It's approved, fully approved. We're not asking you to take any permitting risk or put those dollars out without knowing, right? Because it's a lot of work and a lot of money to get a set of plans. through, that type of permitting process.
Jen, did you have
That's
something?
the other, yeah, I think, and we've been talking about this in the planning office and with Chris, but, and other people, but that particular lot is also zoned for downtown business, which requires retail on the first floor. So that is going to have to be changed, or it could be encompassed in a comprehensive permit to waive that. I have sat through an application for that property, which was denied, and a lot of it was, and it was offices on the first floor and 2 on the, so it's going to take a very special project. I think Tom's right to have a set of plans to be adopted by, say, a Habitat for Humanity. So that's the kind of guidance we're going to need because it's a complicated lot.
It could be a hybrid process where you do the RFP and you select a developer. So I'm talking myself into being more involved, which, but I think given the challenges of this particular lot, I think that's what you're up against. If one way potentially to structure the RFP would be to select a development partner, and in conjunction, before we transfer the property, in conjunction with them, walk it through the permitting process with them is really probably where we're going to end up.
See, I agree with Tom. I agree with Tom. I mean, again, of course, every meeting I always say that we get so hung up and things get delayed. And I just listening to all this. I mean, this thing could get hung up. I don't think we should be pushing the envelope, with the zoning or anything. We should do something that's going to be compatible with everybody's thoughts, but also maybe eliminate having to go through these many things if indeed we have a say, because we have our, we do have a pretty good objective of what we're trying to do. We're trying to get affordable housing here in town. And I just think any path that we can follow that will shorten the process is the one that makes sense.
It also might be useful where Jen has seen a project. There's probably a fair amount of information that can be taken from that proposal and also from what you've seen already from Habitat to sort of give you something that you're starting from. It doesn't sound like you're starting with no information about the property.
Right.
And where it isn't a large property, your options ultimately aren't going to be that different. It's not like a 500
Right.
unit rental building versus a couple duplexes.
Yeah,
They're going to be more limited.
The engineering really, you're saying the engineering really has been done. You have a rough idea what the footprint is, where the curb cuts need to be, what the traffic looks like. So a lot of that, let's call it brain damage, has been done, sounds like.
I think you have at least a lot in your possession now that you can start drawing from or can be made available to anybody. I mean, you're not starting with a lot that you don't know anything about.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't sound like.
Jen and Lauren, do you recall where Affordable Housing Steering Committee and Habitat have been with their discussions? Does Habitat have even like a schematic? I can't remember what they presented to the board. Steve, do you remember?
Yeah, it was they had presented effectively a rendering. It wasn't detailed plans, but rather what they thought would fit on that lot as a 2-unit piece, and it was, if you will, an elevation view from curbside from a couple of different angles. That was
a while ago. Jen and Lauren, I that's what I recall too. Is there any more detailed that you're aware of?
I would suggest the last conversation that I had with the Affordable Housing Steering Committee and Habitat in recent months was more revisiting a conversation. We looked at the lot size. They suggested, preference to 1 unit, given the site is quite small and the constraints. They were discussing potentially the idea too, but really the conversation was, what is the process that needs to ensue? And it was, you need to have the parcel go to the Affordable Housing Trust, you need to do the RFP. So it was a process discussion. There wasn't really much more in terms of detail specific of the, structures. It was, how do we get there, really?
Right. But to Tom's point, maybe how we get there is, taking the project through basically permitting and then you know, and then doing an RFP. Am I understanding that correct?
So
Lee?
I would suggest, can't we look at examples of what other communities have done with similar, to look at the RFP process and see which they did? I mean, the zoning board can't really approve a project without plans. So,
Right, we
you
would
know what
have
I
to do
mean?
that, yeah.
So is it something that goes into the RFP from the trust or the steering committee that says that they have to work through the committees and get it permitted, but we could also work with them. We couldn't waive their engineering fees, but we could waive application fees and things like that because it's for the benefit of the town. I'm just curious as to whether we do have one habitat home in town, but we don't have much information on it. So it's been here so long.
But Tom, am I understanding what the path that you put out there, which is, you know, maybe we actually do the initial engineering and kind of come up with the project.
Yeah.
And then issue the RFP for the sponsor or the partner to come and like buy the project off of us and take it away.
Yeah, I think what Jen's identifying is that's like, and it's the same thing that I identified in my mind. It was, you know, on behalf of incoming nonprofit developer, like they're going to spec a fair amount of time, dollars, engineering, legal, to then have to go for a variance. If they don't do it, then we're going to have to do it, right? And that's Jen's point, is like, you need a full set of plans to go request, you know, the comprehensive permit or whatever. So Jen, one thing I would ask you is, what was the mixed use proposal that was there? How long ago was that?
So it was probably about 4 years ago.
4 years ago.
I could pull it. It was going to be denied, so I think he withdrew. It was a for-profit developer, and he was trying to get as much on there as he could, and then he ran into the issue of realizing it was downtown business, so he had to put retail on the first floor. I'm probably breaking up because my internet. And so he wanted to do 4 units. So it was denied. So I think we just need to identify the limitations on the lot, and it's certainly something, you know, I could meet with the chairman alone with and talk about and say what's the best process. The zoning board does not give variances. Generally, you have to meet a 5-step rule. So what we would do, it would be better to come under a comprehensive permit where things could be waived.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess what I'm trying to get at is, what's our starting point from the standpoint of an engineered plan with a footprint and setbacks and, you know, rough total building size, location, curb cuts, you know, and all that stuff.
It might be that we need to allot funds from the trust.
Was that gentleman's application?
I think if you take some of your existing plans you have and look at them, from what I'm hearing, and the more I'm hearing, this parcel is not that difficult for a developer because it's so small. And because it's affordable housing, a lot of the variance type zoning issues aren't really going to be a factor. And I think anybody who's going to bid on the project is likely to want it. I think it's going to be less complicated if they have their own engineering they're working off of than if the town provides them with engineering and then there's an issue with that engineering down the road. I just think that's a little more complicated than you need to be, and I think there's a little more risk of unforeseen liabilities that you don't want. But I think given what you have about the site and what you have for resources already, you can put together enough of a description so that anyone interested will come out. Now, obviously, they're going to want to walk the property. They're going to want to take their own look. They've probably spec'd out other similar lots and have a much better sense just looking at it of what the constraints may or may not be. And the bigger issue, from what I'm hearing, is what's likely to be an acceptable project. And then once you figure that, you know, if you think 2 units, you're going to be able to put 2 units on that property and you need them and it's affordable housing so you can get it through, then it seems to me there's not all that much wiggle room on this parcel for how to differentiate it and to engineer it. But it seems to me there's a big, huge difference between putting something out for 2 units versus a single family. And to me, that's an internal decision that I think you need to make before you go out to bid, because you're going to get 2 different groups of bidders.
Yeah, and that's where I'd kind of punt it back to Jen to say, how much of this can we hoe the road for ahead of time, because
Right.
I think you're absolutely right. We have to go out in the RFP, and that's where my thinking is going. If we deliver an entitled parcel, okay, that's too far, but where we are today isn't far enough for sure.
No.
We need to be able to provide some direction. What do we think the likelihood of getting I'm actually not familiar enough with the administrative, requirements of a comprehensive permit to understand how you go about getting that approved and giving somebody a level of confidence that it will be approved.
It will get you around most of your, if not all of your zoning concerns.
Subject to public comment, public hearings and whatnot.
Well, there are public comments and hearings, but they generally can't, if it's going to be for affordable housing and it's under a comprehensive permit, zoning does not stop the project. That being said, if you're putting a project in and there's a lot of public opposition to the project, anyone can, as you all know, can delay a project by final appeal. But if this sounds to me like you're putting a project in that is not grossly disproportionate to the neighborhood. And so I don't know that you're going to face that issue.
Yeah, you're dealing with a tough. It's to give you an idea. Some people in the neighborhood want to see a park there.
I've heard that.
Yes.
So, and people just don't. Generally speaking, people don't understand. It's that typical NIMBY.
Yep.
No, just put a park there, and with no regard to who would keep it up, who would put the park in. Any of that stuff. So you're not always, as I'm sure dealing with real estate and whatnot is.
Town meeting should give you some sense of how much support you have.
Yeah, or more so, how much resistance you're going to run into.
This year's town meeting would be a little hard to judge on that.
Yeah, exactly. We're not going to get that measurement, I think, given how town meeting is going to play itself. Yeah.
Diane, can I ask a question of the entire board for a second? And that is that, just assuming that one of the things that Tom is lighting up is just what level of involvement we might play to get this ready. Do we go forward to permitting as the owners of the property, or do we leave that to developer? Either way, my question is, what do we want on the property? And now I'm not talking about ownership or rental as much as I am, if you could put a single unit on there or 2 units, or, I recognize that the past proposal or a past proposal called for as many as 4 units. What impact do we want that property to have on the affordable housing stock in town? Is it worth it for us to fight a battle for 2 units? Or are we just looking to get a foot on the, get a stake in the ground? Anything is good. And it's a question really.
I would love you to answer that. Yeah. Cindy Math.
I'm thinking back to Tom's question about or what he's raised. What is the likely opposition in the neighborhood? And we've watched what's gone on with the Sandy Beach Snack Shack. That's caused an inordinate amount of delays. And even though there's widespread support for it throughout the town, I think having some kind of a good idea of what the neighborhood feeling is like is important. And as if are there things we do ahead of time to try to, not to market or talk about what the advantages are to developing that, so that we can, kind of reassure some of the neighborhood concerns before word gets out that we're looking for an RFP and they're going to put, a 15 unit something down there, whatever conspiracy theories start to generate from there.
Well, and then how do you do that neighborhood engagement right now in a COVID world?
Yeah.
3 months ago, it would have been a lot easier to just hold a meeting at the Greek Orthodox Church, have everyone walk over. You can get a little bit of community buy-in there, or at least, ease off some of the ill will. But how do we do that now?
Now.
Can you do a
Can I-
Zoom?
Can I make one more observation here, because I do live around the corner from this, and yes, there have been some voices, and I mean that, but some voices, in the absence of anything coming back from the other direction, sound pretty loud. There's an abutting neighbor to the lot, whose family I know pretty well, and he's adamantly against any development there because he is. There's another neighbor who lives around the corner, which is the one that's promoted the idea of a park, because after all, this is the entrance to Cohasset, right? The question is to entrance from where? From Hull? I mean, eventually it's not that much of an entrance. And then the physical neighborhood itself, I mean, go take a walk, right? Within a 360-degree view, you've got the old Pope Chapel, which is now the Greek Church. A lot that the town once owned by tax title, which abutted the Greek Church. A couple of small businesses on the southeastern side. Directly across the street is a gorgeous view of a 7-Eleven. And then, of course, you've got Victoria's Sandwich Shop. And then adjacent, you've got a restaurant, the Corner Stop. All right. So it's not like we're asking to drop a trailer park in here. You're talking about putting in housing units into what otherwise is a relatively well-developed retail area, and not particularly attractive. So I think it's Cindy, David, both. Your idea of getting a sense of the neighborhood makes sense, because the neighbors who are going to squawk the loudest, I think, are furthest away from where the actual units would be. That doesn't make their opinion less valuable, but it does make it interesting that they're quite willing to take on the 7-Eleven and transient business morning to night, but people who actually live there, well, that's not what you want. And David, I agree. In a prior, a prior element, it would have been easier to call for a meeting and everybody would show up and you'd have a chance to talk about it. I'm not sure what the best approach is going to be on this, but to not attempt to bring it forward, whether that's by a public Zoom meeting or something else, to not attempt to make that case is probably to invite rampant speculation.
To follow up on what your question was before, Steve, polling the board, do we want to push for a duplex or do we want to go with a single family? I think this is what this conversation ties into, that is, if you get a sense, or if we're engaging with neighbors and they have a sense of buy-in to whatever we wind up with, that gives us a little bit of direction. I mean, if going with a single family property, because that's more appealing, whatever, to the neighborhood, it's going to be less likely to start throwing up roadblocks than if it were a duplex going forward. I mean, personally, I'd rather see as much affordable housing as we can, and the duplex would be where I'd want to go. But is that more likely to cause delays down the road because it's not acceptable in the neighborhood? So having that kind of feel could be important.
Yeah.
So I would echo the same exact thing, which is, if we're going to go through this brain damage, I think we need to get 2 units. I mean, really, that's honestly sort of like a minimum. And I can tell you from personal experience in the development world, if you want 2, you go out with 4.
There you go. There's the marketing aspect. It's all in perspective, all in the framing.
Right. I say that a little bit tongue in cheek, but the idea of a neighborhood meeting is absolutely critical. You can absolutely do it via Zoom. It's funny. I just got LinkedIn. The midge problem around here is back. The little flies.
Yeah.
Knows about any of that, right? So huge email group, and there'll be a Zoom call next week with a neighborhood group and the Hull town manager. So this is happening, right? And we're seeing it all in our own professional lives. Like the whole virtual meeting thing is happening. So I think we can do a leaflet drop. We can drop flyers, to everybody in the neighborhood, and we can get a Zoom call that'll be well attended. I think that won't be a problem. But we do have to think hard about, and I think instead of like, again, I said it a little bit jokingly, like we don't go out, we don't go out with 4 because we want 2, but anchoring is important.
Mm-hmm.
So in that Zoom meeting, a great way to open that meeting is to say, hey, here's some other proposals we've seen. 4 units, 2 units above another convenience store. Does anybody here want a convenience store? No? Okay. How about two workforce housing? We'll use the word workforce housing. 2 workforce housing units owned by local teachers, firemen, cops,
Mhm.
And that's the pitch. Now I'm getting in my sales mode, but that's, I think that's eminently doable. Duplex, workforce housing, ownership is a good story, I think, and usually in the neighborhood. So I'm starting to get ramped up. Let's do it.
I'm buying. I'm
Bring
buying
up
into
that
that.
host of horribles.
Jen?
I have one question for Cindy. My recall, and I can look in this, is that comprehensive permits would only be appealable to DHCD. Is that correct?
Well, that would be the first step, yes.
The first step. So they're very difficult to appeal, is my understanding. They would just send them back to the board to review it. And that can give you an example for 25 Ripley Road, which is, I don't know if you know, it's the building on the corner across from the library. That was a 21-month comprehensive permit where he came in for 6 and left with 4. And he received the approval, but then he never had the funding to build it. So, and that permit has since expired. My only concern is doing the group meeting just as a public hearing standpoint, is that is why we have the advertisements in the public hearing. I know you want to get the input, but they would be during that process. So I don't know if it's the cart before the horse situation, and I just feel if we could look at examples of what other towns have done, and also if it's going to be Habitat for Humanity, what they come with when they propose for a project. Do they offer to do this? I just think it would be helpful to have that information.
Yeah. Actually, Cindy, I'd like to specifically frame the question this way, because I've seen it done with a for-profit development situation where the developer hosts neighborhood meetings, right?
Correct.
They're not sanctioned. They're not
They're
necessarily,
not public hearings.
right.
They're
But what you're doing is
informational.
yes, and you're laying the groundwork, and you're hearing the feedback, and the disingenuous developers kind of use those as if they were public hearings, and they just come with whatever they want anyways, right? But here we would potentially use this in a real way to solicit neighborhood feedback. Are we able to do that as the AHT? Or?
Absolutely. You can have a public meeting for anything you want to hold a public meeting for, as long as you give proper notice and conduct it publicly. This is not a public hearing under the comprehensive permit. You're not there yet. If it was a hearing, there would be a whole different formalized process. This is just a public informational meeting about, we're looking at this. We thought you might be interested. Can we have some input? There is no legal requirement to do it. There is no legal determination that will result from it. There is nothing that can be appealed unless there's some open meeting law violation or something like that. But it is literally a public information meeting. And, I don't think you want to go in completely without some limitations to form it, because I think you're just setting yourself up for every naysayer in the world. But you go in with, here's, maybe the Habitat proposal or something loosely like it. Here's the worst thing that could happen on the property, retail and units above. Here's realistically 1 family home, 1 duplex, some combination. You're really soliciting input, and, it's just what it says. It's a public informational meeting. It's not a public hearing.
Just a couple thoughts on that. This is where I think it might be best to use the Affordable Housing Steering Committee. as the broker, the host
Mhm.
of the neighborhood conversation, because they're the ones that have done the visioning kind of what's needed and where we need to go. They've done the housing production plan. So, and it separates us because we have a different role in this from sort of the community feels. So that I would suggest that does happen through them. And then the timing almost doesn't matter. With respect to us, I think, I'd like to propose that we start moving on at least putting together the pieces of information for an RFP, and we don't do anything really public and official until after town meeting, because town meeting still has to vote on transferring this property. And I think behind the scenes, we can be working on queuing up and agreeing to some of the details of an RFP that will be ready to launch, working time-wise back maybe in July. And I mean, if that's even remotely realistic, Lauren, I don't know. But we we bring the Affordable Housing Committee, almost cover, and to kind of queue up this conversation in the realm of creating affordable housing. The other issue I had, Cindy Amara, you mentioned early on something about affordable and rental units. Does that make a difference as to how they count toward the affordable housing stock?
They do, but from what I'm hearing on this particular project, if you have 2 units, they will both be affordable anyway. That's what I'm
Yes.
hearing.
Right.
So it wouldn't make a difference because you would have 2 units either way. But if you had, say, a 20, you'd have a quarter of them affordable
Right.
if it
Right.
was
Got it.
ownership versus all in rental.
Got it. Okay.
What is your relationship? I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
What's your relationship with the steering committee?
Well, I mean, one of the questions we had at our last meeting was, what is our relationship with the steering committee in terms of like kind of official, who does what, where, and when, how do they get involved in the RFP or not? So there's no formal relationship other than, a lot of us have been involved in their meetings and are, we talk to them all the time, and they're very anxious to move this forward. I believe, Lauren, that the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board are going to be discussing the housing production plan, which I know the members of the Affordable Housing Steering Committee have been engaged with. Help me out, where are we? Am I thinking the right thing?
Yes, that's the last step in local adoption of the housing production plan. It was planned for March 31st, and as we all know, things got delayed. So that'll be happening again on June 3rd.
Okay.
And I love the idea of putting them out front on this. This solves, it doesn't solve exactly, but it puts them in exactly the right spot. Diane, I love you're exactly right. It keeps us more in the background, them more out front, collecting the community feedback, keeps them engaged, lets them run that part of the process. So I think it helps quite a bit on a couple of different fronts.
So
Are they in a position to take a lead on the RFP production?
well, I mean, that was kind of our question at our last meeting was, I mean, we feel like we should be the RFP issuers because we own the property, or we will after town meeting. We just didn't know how to involve them because they're more of a study community. They just have a different role than we do. So I don't know.
They came about, sorry, that committee came about as a recognition that past attempts at putting together the trust and the trustees fell flat because the trustees became advocates for very specific projects. And as a result, got nothing done, right? And so the goal was to separate the trust activity from a strategic and fiduciary standpoint from the activity of, if you will, proponent. And so the steering committee's job is to exactly that, is to drum up the opportunities, to define them, to bring them to the trust for action, right? And our job then is to put the instruments together to make sure that if, so long as we're in agreement, those ideas could move to some actionable format. Okay,
And related to this,
the goal is to work cooperatively. I'm sorry, Tom, after you.
no, yeah, it's perfect segue is exactly that is related to who develops the RFP. I think, Lauren said it well, obviously some town officials be involved, but if they, if they being the steering committee are also involved, they need to be, right? Because they've been deepest involved in the discussion with Habitat. And if the idea is to craft an RFP that for sure would include, a potential win, by Habitat, they would want to naturally be involved anyways. So it feels like a first draft, and kind of working group as far as developing the RFP. Once we decide, from the top down, like okay, yeah, it's definitely ownership. Yeah, it's definitely a duplex, whatever we make those decisions on, first cut, first pass at the, drafting the actual RFP might fall back down to those guys. Does that sound right?
Yep. So what I want to do, and this is a selfish thing. I have to jump off in 15 to 20 minutes for sure. So I want to try to get us to wrap up this discussion with some next steps. I don't want anybody to feel like they haven't had a chance to talk about it, because I feel Rob's pain about, talking through everything and never getting anywhere. But what I would like to propose is that we start, and Lauren and Jen, let me know if this is not possible. We literally start getting on paper an RFP. I guess I can throw it out to the trustees right now. I mean, are you comfortable with ownership, duplex, and like just starting to frame those details within it? And then, we can come back in whatever 10 days or whatever makes sense to kind of look at a draft and figure out, where we might want to make modifications, and also bring in, maybe the chair of the Affordable Housing Steering Committee, just as another thought partner as we flush this out.
Can we make a decision today, like a vote, and say that we are in favor of ownership or for rental? I mean, I think the point is that this is affordable. It's not like in Avalon, we have so many units, you got to have a certain percentage affordable. We know this is affordable. And I happen to think, in Cohasset, down on that area, I think an ownership makes sense. I'm not doing it based on a whole lot of information, but again, I think maybe at least to get that today, that do we feel we should have 1 unit, 2 units, ownership, or rent? Is that plausible?
Is that a motion?
Yes.
I'll second it.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on that? Anybody have any? Cindy?
Just one point back to Cindy Amara, that there seems to be rental units available in the area, but ownership is harder to come by. So that's one argument, indeed, to keep it ownership.
Okay.
We just need a roll
That's
call.
one
vote.
Any other comments? Otherwise,
That's one more
Yep.
argument. That's a good point, that I think the ownership just makes sense in this town when you can do it. I mean, it's a perception,
Yep.
rental versus ownership.
Great.
And separately from number of units, I take Tom's comment to heart, and it may be worth bringing the chairman and
up.
vice chairman of steering committee in to talk about it. What is the maximum number of units we might think of being able to put on that space? Not what's wise, but what's possible.
Mhm.
Okay. And I'm thinking about Tom's comments. You want to give the developer the flexibility to say, I want 4. Oh, okay. Well, I can only get 2 in there. Fine, we'll get 2.
Okay.
So, I'm personally in favor of ownership in that location,
Great.
and I would really like to support multiple units.
So
Based on all this discussion, aren't we saying? I mean, it sounds like we're really saying 2 units would be maximum there. That make any sense in that size lot? So
I don't know, Rob. I just don't know, because first of all, I'm not a builder. I'm not looking at the lot saying, well, can you go down? Can you go up? At 35 feet above ground level, does that provide enough space based on the footprint, parking, et cetera? And so again, I'm just looking at it from the perspective of more than one. Okay.
Agreed, and I think that, maybe we don't vote on that, but to Cindy Amara's earlier point, I think we need to just start, bringing in the engineer and starting to figure out some of those details that are going to have to be part of the RFP eventually. But we have a motion and a second. Because we're in Zoom, we have to do a roll call vote. So I'll just call your name, and if you could say your name and state aye or nay. I would
Diane?
appreciate, yeah.
Forgive me. Just clarify the terms of the motion one more time.
So the motion, Tom?
Before we do, I might just say, instead of the motion for 2 units, say multiple. And, because I think the biggest thing is what ownership and number of units.
Okay.
You want me to rephrase the motion?
Yeah, if you could, because your original motion only had the ownership.
Yeah. I make a motion that we consider this property to be ownership only, not rental, and that we will look into the feasibility of multiple units versus one.
Good motion.
Second.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Okay. All right. Any other discussion? Okay. So roll call vote. Rob?
Aye.
Cindy Matheson?
Cindy Matheson, aye.
Steve?
Steve Gomer, aye.
Tom?
Tom Mead, aye.
David?
David Pfeiffer, aye.
Diane Kennedy, aye.
All
Great.
right, Diane, since I went first, I made the first mistake. I didn't say Rob. Aye.
Don't worry about it. That's okay. We got you. Still a legal vote. Okay, so Jen and Lauren, I am going to reach out to you to just kind of funnel down to some of the next steps that we need to do. And then I might reach out to those of you on this committee to fill in some pieces where I can't. And I will also reach out to Rob Jeffers and Paul Kearse of the Affordable Housing Steering Committee and see if they can meet with us at our next meeting, which we'll send out a poll to figure out when we can do that. Hopefully within 2 weeks at the most. And just, yep, Jen?
I would like to suggest that you have the next meeting after you own the property.
Yep. Okay.
Which is the 6th town meeting. And then
Okay.
that we need time to start looking at the timelines for how to do this. And I think we have a lot of meetings going right now. So
Okay.
both between Lauren and I, we're averaging Lauren's meeting like 5 times a week. So it's just a lot. And
I know.
June and July are going to pick up. And this is something I would really like to do some work on and figure out what the proper timeline steps are for you. So if you do those reach outs to those people, that's going to help. And then I can talk to Lauren. But I know we'd like to have this go as quickly as possible, but there's just a lot of steps that need to be considered. And so we could actually do a physical timeline showing where the things would happen. And I'd like to look at an example. So, and that would include the public meeting and everything that you've discussed today. I've taken copious notes. So if just wanted to be upfront because
I thank you, and I appreciate that. I should have. I'm trying to cross things off my list too.
If
I
I
mean,
could
we're here to help, but
Yeah.
I just want to add to what Jen just said. In the meantime, we can also be having those conversations with our in-house staff, whether it's, procurement, engineering, whomever would normally be involved in the permitting process to get the information that's at the very baseline of what we're dealing with on this site. So that's something that we can also start doing in the meantime.
Thank you. Cindy Amara?
I also think that it's very wise not to do anything too publicly until after town meeting, but you will have the ability at town meeting when people start getting all worked up to say, we fully intend to have public meetings to discuss everything, and it sort of will ramp things down and hopefully carry you across the goal line.
Yeah, just as a little kind of insider, town meeting is going to be very interesting this year. The plan is it's going to be like a drive-in kind of movie theater experience at the South Shore Music Circus. And to be honest, I think most of the people that will be attending town meeting are the people that have been engaged in the process and are on the committees. And I don't anticipate a lot of pushback because the idea of transferring the property, the idea of transferring more money for us that are both on the warrant for town meeting have gone like smoothly. Like people are cheering. They're so happy that we're addressing this. And again, those are the people that most likely are going to be at town meeting. So I don't anticipate opposition there, but again, then you get the cranky people that are like, you did what and when? And that's where, you know, it's going to be important to do our work the right and keep different tracks going. I mean, you can do the public relations on one side while we're queuing up the details that are going to end up in an RFP. And you know, anyway, so we got that. I want to try to move on to the next piece, which we have Cindy Amara here for, which is the process for amending the declaration of trust. So we did file that like 6 or 8 weeks ago, and now we have a full trust, and we need to add those details to it. And then the other piece is probably a secondary action that we might want to look at, which is when we originally looked at the declaration of trust and looked at some of how it jibed with the bylaws, there were some things that Tom, I will give him credit, kind of brought to our attention, like, ooh, really? Is it that? So I do think there's probably it's probably wise for us to relook at the bylaws and the details to make sure that we're a well-oiled machine, and maybe look at some adjustments to the bylaws and thus the trust in terms of how we function at special town meeting in the fall. So we'll want to do that. But in the meantime, we do have a full complement of members, of trustees, and probably should update the declaration of trust.
That's a very simple, it's just a filing an amendment. And I don't have the trust in front of me. I'd have to look at it to see exactly what paragraphs we talk about, and clearly a new signature page. But it's a very, very simple process. And it's just filing it in court, referencing the original trust in the book and page which recorded, and then just re-recording the new one.
Okay, so is that something administratively that Jen and Lauren can?
I'm happy to work with them on it. You know, I can just take a look at the trust and draft an amendment for them.
Okay. Anybody have any comments on that?
One, Tom had identified within the trust a conflict versus what we had viewed as the independence of the trust against the way it's actually written.
The budgeting and yeah.
Right. Is this the point in time where we want to address that, or simply put it on a future agenda to discuss it with Cindy to figure out how to address it?
I think we need to address that. I would like to get all 7 members on, amend the trust to the declaration so that the 7 members are on there and we're solid there. I think your point is, I think, more complicated because we will potentially be in conflict with the bylaws. So we would need a bylaw change at the same time. And we're not going to be able to do that till special town meeting in December. So,
at the earliest. At
the earliest. So I do think that's a conversation we need to start having, but I don't think it's today.
Okay. Just can we put it on a future agenda?
100%. Yeah.
Let me. I can. Why don't I do this? I'll go back to my red line markup of the document, and I can provide like a summary of what we saw as the conflicts. And then we can have something like we can all refer to, right? Yep. Like an actual document tracking what we think we may need for changes to the bylaw and changes to the DOT.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's definitely something we need to do.
Then we'll have that out there, and we won't lose track of it. So we're punting, but there's going to be some action on it, Rob.
Yeah.
Right.
And again,
we should do it all at once.
Including adding the 7 members?
No. I mean, but any changes you're going to make to it, you want to do it thoroughly and all at once, and you can't possibly do it now anyway.
Correct.
Yep. So you might as well look at the whole.
Yep.
No, I mean, I think we eventually have to target these changes for a town meeting. As Diane points out, first step is to address the bylaw, and you can do it concurrently, address the bylaw and the declaration of trust at the same time. But the first step is that, and is it logical to go for special town meeting, or are we better off looking to address it by annual town meeting next year? So,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
Diane, I'm just putting it out there for
No,
consideration from our
right.
standpoint. Where does it go in the
Right.
pecking order of stuff that we've got to get done?
Right. Well, in the town, and I think we don't know that yet because everything
Right.
could be upside down by September. So
It's not
but
upside down now?
I think we as a trust, we're the ones that are going to drive that conversation about bylaw changes, which will impact the declaration. And we should just start. We can do that this summer, assuming we're not too crazy busy, and then see where it makes sense to bring to town meeting. So.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. All right. Do you mind if we do a speed round through the rest of the agenda? Town meeting CPC update. Lauren and Jen, jump in if this isn't what we need to talk about, but we have 2 articles. Article 16 is $200,000 from CPC that will go into our coffers, assuming it is passed. So that's exciting. And then, and then one of our next steps is to really start working on a financial strategy, as Steve brought up last time, and we'll have a bank account with some money in it. And we'll also have a sense of where this RFP for 808 Jerusalem Road might be going, and whether that's going to require any kind of a financial commitment in addition to the land. And Article 23 is the transfer of 808 Jerusalem Road. So those are big. So, hoping we'll get a quorum at town meeting on the 16th, as challenging as it is. And we'll get these done and behind us, and we can start really making some things happen. And again, as I said earlier, both of those articles were slam dunk. Thank you. It's about time from our advisory committees. So I don't anticipate any pushback at town meeting. Anybody want to weigh in? Okay. We have on our agenda the financial strategy for the Affordable Housing Trust. If it's okay with you, just in the interest of time, we'll just add that. We'll just keep that on our agendas, knowing that, we have to come up with something. And I would ask each of you to think about that, just in terms of your own ideas on, to what extent do we want to financially get involved in for example, 808 Jerusalem Road, are we going to potentially contribute money in addition to land? Or, are we keeping our money for potential acquisition of things as we go forward?
I think the other thing, Diane, that I had in mind on the financial strategies too was the other side, revenue generation. And from that end,
bake sales?
Bake sales. Ted is potentially a big contributor there.
Yep.
Effectively, what I'm looking at is what other sources of funding might the trust have available to it, either through grants, federal programs, state programs that we're just thoroughly unaware of. And and where should we start exploring?
Yep. Another thing too, just a kind of low-hanging fruit on that is the CPC money. Some towns, and Cindy Amara, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is some towns, it's just kind of an automatic transfer of the the CPC funding, just kind of goes every annual town meeting. It just transfers directly to the trust.
Yes.
So
it's a water town that's a huge part of their funding.
So instead of, coming up with whatever, what do we need to do to streamline that going forward so that, it's not like, oh, we're asking for an X amount of dollars. So that'll keep going. Lauren, I think we addressed the housing production plan status. So the next step in that process is for the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board to meet jointly to adopt the housing production plan. And my understanding is that's happening on June something.
June 3rd, yes. It's scheduled for June 3rd, and that'll be the final portion of local adoption. And then it'll go on for the state to be complete. So the Affordable Housing Steering Committee did vote, and I'm forgetting the date, but back in March to approve from their point. Now that's the next pass. So June 3rd, that'll be happening at the Planning Board meeting. We'll be in joint session for the first portion of it with the Board of Selectmen.
Great. And I'll send out I'll send out the agenda to everybody on this committee, just so that if you want to just listen in, hopefully it'll be, I think it's a part of a regular planning board meeting. So hopefully it'll be fairly quick and slam dunk. Okay, next on the agenda is trust member updates. Does anybody have anything to add or request going forward for agendas or otherwise?
I do not.
Everybody staying in town other than Rob going down, or where'd you say you were going, Rhode Island?
Yes. Yeah, unfortunately, I'm going to be away that week of the town meeting. I feel badly about that, but.
That's okay. I wish we could find a way to get you to participate in town meeting remotely, because we need to get there as a community.
Yeah, it would be interesting, but I guess that wouldn't be quite legal.
Not allowed by state. Yeah. We've been looking at that. So anybody else?
My wife's threatening to rent an RV and kidnap us for a 4-week trip.
I've been thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
It's just like, you just got to get out of Dodge once in a while, huh?
So we'll see. But if we do it, we're going to have to be connected, given our works schedule stuff. So we won't miss town meeting, and I would still be available, on Zoom.
Great. My goal for meetings, whenever on any committee or chair, is to poll the board and try to get as many people to be able to participate. So we won't randomly select meeting dates that we haven't at least reached out to everybody on and tried to coordinate around. So Lauren and Jen, anything for the good of the order?
Nope, just want to tell you that I don't have the minutes, so that takes the thing off the agenda.
Oh, excellent. All right.
Next one.
And yeah, and if I could just say, thank you to the staff. It is not easy. I mean, a lot of us are also working professional jobs, and it's Zoom and not have the same kind of cadence to your jobs, and everything's like pressure cooker time, especially at this time of year. So Jen and Lauren and Cindy and everybody, thank you so much for trying to keep us on track, especially because we're so new, and I feel, I feel completely in the woods on this particular topic, but I do see us moving forward, and I think it's pretty exciting, and thanks to everybody for everything. All right, I have nothing else. Unless somebody has something to say, I'll call for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Seconded.
All right, David. All right, we have to do a roll call to get out of here. Steve?
Steve Gomer, aye.
Cindy?
Cindy Matheson, aye.
Rob?
Rob Henry, aye.
David?
David Pfeiffer, aye.
Tom
Mead, aye.
Diane Kennedy, aye. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Thanks,
Stay
Jen.
well.
Thanks, Lauren.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.